Hello and welcome back to my channel, Double Back for Ammo. In this video I'm going to play Alan Wake for the first time and share what happens and my impressions. There will be spoilers and story discussion, and I'll discuss the good and bad encountered as well as my hopes for the upcoming sequel. If you do stick around and enjoy yourself, all I ask is that you click the like button on the page of this video. The trailer for Alan Wake 2 recently premiered at the 2023 PlayStation Showcase. It's a sequel to the Xbox 360 game published by Remedy Entertainment in 2010. The announcement has been met with a lot of excitement and anticipation. The first game was favorably praised, sold okay, and was later remastered for the PS4, PS5, and Xbox One, Series XS, as well as the Switch. Time magazine once named Alan Wake the top 360 game of the year in 2010, and the article is still online to this date. If I sound removed from the situation, it's because I was. I have never played Alan Wake despite numerous individuals over the years reaching out and recommending that I should. So with the recent announcement, I decided to install and play the PC version of the original game. I played the game on normal difficulty, and here is what I experienced. The game is narrated throughout by the eponymous hero, Alan Wake.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end.
This quote from Stephen King is from his memoir, On Writing. This is one of the things he says to justify his work against criticism of his endings. As a lifelong Stephen King reader, I'm all too aware of Stephen King's problems with endings, and Alan Wake's quote was an immediate warning to me that the story of the game might have a somewhat confusing or ambivalent ending, and we'll get to that towards the end. After we learn only that Alan is a writer who likes to quote Stephen King, we are plunged into a dream sequence in which Alan is driving at night. As he enters the town of Night Springs, he accidentally runs over someone in the road. When the body vanishes, Alan abandons his damaged vehicle and sets off for a lighthouse in the distance. Alan is abruptly and mysteriously drawn to look back at his vehicle, where he sees the man he ran over covered in dark, shadowy clouds. The man suddenly teleports in front of him and starts swinging an axe, forcing the player to proceed. This added a nice tension to what is easily identifiable as a tutorial stage meant to familiarize the player with the controls. The next lesson is about the dodge system, which causes the game to go into slow motion when the player dodges a melee attack. I'll talk more about this dodge system later, however, as it proved to be a frustrating element of the game. The game then encourages you to sprint away from the entity pursuing you, and while it works fine in the tutorial, Alan's sprint is another frustrating element I'll talk more about later. After crossing a bridge, Alan encounters a man named Clay Stewart, who tries to save Alan while reminding him that they know each other, but Alan leaves Stewart locked outside the house to be killed by the evil entity. We will never, in the course of the entire game, get an explanation of who Stewart was or if he's okay in the real world, and this kind of bothered me, serving as another red flag. Back to Alan, who's trapped in a cabin with the evil entity still outside. The fact that we're in a dream is reinforced when the many TVs in the cabin turn on and start hissing threats at us. We are then damaged to the point of dying when the wall tears away and a voice orders us to follow a light outside. The voice guides us to stand under a nearby light until fully healed. The light then floats up in the sky and the voice recites a strange poem about the lake. The light then leads Alan over to a crate full of revolver ammo. The light sends down a flashlight for Alan, and the voice orders him to shine the light on the dark entity standing nearby. However, boosting the light causes the batteries to drain, and the flashlight needs new batteries inserted to keep attacking the dark enemy. After inserting a battery and finishing the job, the voice explains that we've removed the darkness from the enemy, but they are still evil and not savable. So now we need to shoot the guy with a revolver, also provided by the light. So, just like any good old American, we're solving our problems with guns once again. We're released from the corral and faced with another enemy who appears to be the exact same axe-wielding type we just killed. After applying what we've learned with the flashlight, we're able to kill him with the revolver. Like before, the enemy vanishes in an electric cloud. So from my perspective, the game is establishing that we can't really kill the enemies possessed by the dark entity, and that the same enemies will come back again and again to try to kill us under these supernatural circumstances. After killing the next two enemies, we reach another bright light safe zone, this time with an emergency box containing a flare gun and flares. However, the game doesn't explain the use use or benefit of the weapon, and so I tried to take on the next group of enemies the same as before, with the flashlight and gun. Only by accidentally switching to the flare gun and firing did I save myself from an unnecessary death. But now I've seen that the game allows me to take out groups of enemies by firing a flare. The tutorial segment then finishes up with Alan reaching the safety of the lighthouse, and his nightmare ends with his wife Alice waking him up in their car. They are on a ferry, traveling to the town of Bright Falls, located somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. You can interact with people on the ferry by approaching them, and Alan meets the host of the local talk radio station who recognizes Alan as a famous writer. We get a call from Alan's agent, Barry, who eventually becomes a major character in the game.
Yeah?
Hey, bestseller, how's my favorite writer? Are you there yet?
You can also hear some grunts from this character dressed in camouflage who will also reappear in the game later. We leave the ferry by getting into the car from either side. Alice drops Alan off at the local diner where he's supposed to get a key to the cabin they're renting from Carl Stuckey. Inside, we're introduced to more characters who are Alan's fans. There's even a standee just inside the door with his likeness. Alan meets Rose and Rusty, and he can also meet the brothers, Tor and Odin Anderson, at the table in the corner. Carl Stuckey is supposedly in the bathroom in the back corridor of the diner, where we meet an eccentric woman I decided to call the Lamp Lady for the time being. Upon knocking on the men's room door, Alan is intercepted by a woman dressed like a widow. She says Carl couldn't make it, and she gives Alan the key to the cabin and directions to get there. All that's left is to leave the diner, but I was struck by all the similarities of the diner and the characters in it to the early 1990s TV show Twin Peaks. I felt like I had just visited the Double R Diner in David Lynch's legendary television storytelling experience, and I also became a bit alarmed. We'll return to these similarities later, but for now, we're leaving the diner and Carl Stuckey staggers out of the diner trying to flag us down and give us the keys to the cabin. Apparently, the creepy old widow we encountered has deliberately stepped into the situation and sent Alan and his wife to the wrong cabin. Carl also bends over, not looking so good. Whatever happened while he was locked in the men's room has clearly affected his senses. As Alice and Alan proceed to the lake cabin, the song In Dreams by Roy Orbison plays. This song featured prominently in a famous scene from David Lynch's film Blue Velvet. I'm not sure what we're supposed to take away from all these in-game references to David Lynch. Is the game doing this to make us mentally associate the characters in town of Bright Falls with the works of David Lynch for some reason? Alice and Alan arrive at the cabin located on Tiny Diver's Isle on Cauldron Lake. Alan continues narrating as if the player is reading a novel by playing the game and explains that Alice is afraid of the dark.
I wanted to make sure we were inside with the lights on before sunset.
I made a short trip back up the hill to where the car was parked and found that I could trigger additional dialogue about the island resembling a bird's foot, and I also found another coffee thermos. I'd already found a couple of these during the nightmare sequence. I don't know what these did in game, if anything, but I found them everywhere and tried to pick up as many as I could to see what happens, but nothing ever happened. Perhaps it's because I'm playing the PC port and these only unlock something in the Xbox 360 version, like an achievement, but if they no longer unlocked anything, then why leave them in the PC port? Back to Alice in the cabin, I ran ahead of her and marveled at the surroundings, which are still gorgeous to look at to this day. The cabin is dark, and I wind up exploring the entire place looking for a way to get the power on. On the back porch is a radio we can turn on where we hear the talk radio host we met on the ferry doing exactly what Alan asked him not to do, and mentioning on air that there's a famous artist in town for the upcoming Deer Festival. This storytelling mechanic of using radios and TVs to expand the backstory occurs throughout the game and throughout Remedy Entertainment's other games, and it's one I heartily enjoy. These tend to provide the player an opportunity to take a little break and dive deeper into the world of the game, or sometimes provides a little humor and levity to the dark situations we encounter. I hope we see a lot more of this mechanic in Alan Wake 2. Continuing to explore the cabin, it becomes clear we're meant to wander the entire place, as going to the writing room on the second floor triggers a scary flash in Alan's head. There's also a photo on the bookcase of a person in a deep-sea diving suit standing on the docks behind this cabin. This little clue helps tie the beginning together with the ending, as we'll see later. In the bedroom, Alan narrates that the cabin seems like a time capsule from the 1960s. We can see that the calendar on the wall is indeed displaying July of 1970, a date that will be important to the story later. After exploring the entire cabin, we return to the front door where Alice points out the power cable goes over to the small shack behind the cabin. I got confused by the textures on the shack and kept wondering why I couldn't get through this door. Whoops, the door was over here. Starting a generator in Alan Wake has its own mechanic where the user must press the button displayed as as the arrow moves through the green part of the wheel. Alan will be starting up generators to get lights on throughout his entire adventure. I missed the opportunity to examine something on the ground before another cutscene triggered, and we resume with Alan watching the sunset on the lake. We return inside, find a coffee thermos, and hear Alice as we go upstairs. Alice has a little surprise for Alan, having secretly brought his typewriter and paper to the island so that Alan may continue writing. Alan is pissed off, however, because he intended their stay here to be a vacation from work, and also because Alan has apparently been suffering writer's block. Alice mentions that there's a local therapist in Bright Falls named Dr. Hartman who might be able to help, but Alan is angry at her and becomes irrational. The power goes out and Alice panics for a moment. She acts like she can't see Alan at all in the darkness. When the lights come on, Alan storms out on her. While he's outside tripping over himself and laughing at how badly he treats his encouraging wife, the power in the cabin goes out again and Alice cries out. Returning to the cabin, we are suddenly attacked by a flock of black birds. Pointing the flashlight at them in the sky seems to damage the flock and keep them from attacking again until we get to the cabin door and get inside, where we see Alice has fallen through the rear deck railing and sinks in the water below. Diving in, Alan sees only darkness. Alan finds a book in the open trunk by Dr. Emil Hartman, obviously belonging to Alice. And at this point, I walked the wrong direction and immediately fell off a cliff. Finding the trail, we're informed we have to make it through the woods to a gas station. And then further down, we see the bright light from Alan's opening dream sequence. Is Alan dreaming again? Manuscript pages appear out of nowhere. Alan reads them and says they're from a manuscript titled Departure, which was Alan's title for his next novel. Alan doesn't remember writing these pages, and yet he's credited as the writer on the title page. The other page describes Alan encountering a crazed axe murderer covered in shadows in the forest. Throughout the game, we'll discover more manuscript pages to pick up along the main path and also by exploring side areas. These manuscript pages, apparently written by Alan when he doesn't remember, are one of the most interesting mechanics of the game. If found with the right timing, they tend to foreshadow surprises and traps we'll find ahead. And by their predicting the future, these manuscript pages also add another supernatural aspect to the game as we try to figure out who is writing the pages and whether this means Alan might be trapped in one of his own novels come to life. Continuing along the path, we must carefully walk up a tree to enter a lumberyard where Alan hopes to find a phone. Instead, Alan finds Carl Stuckey, possessed by evil forces. Nearby, we find another manuscript page that defines the game's enemies as the Taken. The atmosphere turns blurry, indicating the presence of supernatural forces nearby, and we'll see this mechanic over and over throughout the game as a warning that we're about to encounter enemies. Alan barely makes it into a portable house where he finds a flashlight and a revolver. If we use the phone to call the sheriff, we can see outside that Stuckey chops down the telephone pole and the call cuts off. A bulldozer becomes possessed and pushes the portable house off the cliff as we bail out the side door. In the next area, I found a floodlight to turn on just as two enemies emerge, but they weren't easily fooled into walking into the light. Clearly, I'd have to be smarter about when to turn on these floodlights. On a nearby rock, there's a yellow arrow that only the flashlight reveals. Following it behind the structure, we find a hidden stash marked by a yellow torch symbol. The box is marked with Bright Falls Light and Power, indicating that the supplies are provided by the local power company. Inside is a flare gun and flares. Apparently someone else in the town is aware of what happens in Bright Falls after nightfall, and we have them to thank for providing extra weapons and ammo. After kicking a fuse box, we get to cross another telephone pole that's crushed yet another gate, and I encountered another enemy. What I didn't know was that the game had equipped Alan with a flare gun when I picked it up, so after using my flashlight to dispel the darkness from the Taken, I accidentally fired my one and only flare at this one enemy. Admittedly, this mechanic of equipping Alan with the gun he just picked up would frustrate me. I went off path to find another manuscript page about the waitress from the diner describing the moments just after Alan left. This leads me to question whether all the characters we met so far are just characters in a novel that was written by Alan. This is further reinforced when we're crossing some small rocks in a river and find another manuscript page about Alan's agent, Barry Wheeler, getting anxious and jumping on a plane to Bright Falls, foreshadowing that Barry will appear in town shortly. The next area held a kind of environmental puzzle I need to solve to proceed, and I had to explore this large environment quite a bit before I found a generator in a smaller nook at the back. This was protected by a group of Taken, who I had more trouble defeating than I should because I'd wasted my flare gun earlier. After cranking up the generator, I found a shotgun inside the nearby shed along with a manuscript page about Alan being attacked by birds again. Then I made my way back to use another switch that allowed me to move a makeshift bridge of logs between the two woodpiles, and it was at this point that I realized I'd missed exploring a secondary destination in the area, available by climbing the ladder on another stack of logs to reach a big shed with another supply stash containing batteries. And this is how I realized that the max number of batteries Alan can hold is 20, which is not many at all for dealing with situations where Alan must use the flashlight to be able to proceed. Returning to the other woodpiles, I climbed up and crossed the little bridge we made, and only spotted this coffee thermos I'd missed while editing this video. Not that I regret it, since they do nothing in the PC version anyway. At the next checkpoint, I played the radio, grabbed some ammo, and found another stash nearby with a flare gun. After Alan notes that he's getting closer to the gas station, we can hear Stucky screaming to himself in the dark.
Paul makes the best dogs in the state. Belly Burster is the best with no contest. Hamster Dog is second best. The famous dog is...
He's clearly possessed, like a demon or like one of the characters in the Evil Dead movie franchise, and I like this spooky element. Finding another generator, I start trying to activate it when enemies appear behind me. Luckily, I get it started and find that the enemies had vanished, otherwise they might have got me. I encounter them a short distance away from the safe haven, and this time I was able to use the flare gun correctly. Now that I'm getting the hang of combat, I take out more enemies and find more supply stashes before reaching yet another lumber yard. Inside the little shack at the entrance, I find a TV that I can turn on and watch an entire episode of a show called Night Springs. In Alan's first dream, this was the name of the town he was entering, but in this reality, it's a Twilight Zone parody, providing yet another way for Alan and ourselves to stop and take a break from all the darkness and tension around us. Further back in the lumberyard, we can hear Stucky out there in the dark, and though I'm out of flares, there's an ammo crate near the opening. When Stucky appears, he's accompanied by other enemies, and it's here that I start to experience some frustration with the combat system, since I'm able to dodge one enemy's attack, but then I'm left completely vulnerable to the next attack from the other enemy, and this is how I experience another death. In my next attempt, I'm better at keeping my distance and refilling my flashlight with batteries when I get low, but killing the first 3 subordinates only triggers 3 more to appear, and now I've got less batteries and less ammo. But somehow I manage it, and then Stucky himself comes after me. At first he seems no different than other enemies, except then he starts warping around the area, faster than Alan can track. In the hopes that I could bait him back into my flashlight beam, I waited for him to return and attack Alan. And then I waited some more. Eventually, I got bored and opened the exit, and that's when Stucky resumed attacking. But since he's the only enemy left, this is one situation where the dodge system actually benefits the player. I finally remove his darkness and take him out with 4 shotgun blasts, but my impression is that the AI of this boss seems really buggy. Finally arriving at the gas station, Alan reads on a sign that Deerfest is now only 7 days away. This means he's somehow lost an entire week since his blackout at the cabin. Inside the gas station garage, Alan sees himself on the television in the writer's room back at the cabin, working on the typewriter and talking about how he's trapped by the darkness. Behind the counter is a phone Alan uses to call for help. Sheriff Sarah Breaker arrives on scene, listens to Alan's wild claims, and insists that there is no island on Cauldron Lake, not since the 1970s. The sheriff takes Alan to the lake to see for himself that the entire Bird's Foot Island and the cabin are gone. The long exposition of Alan Wake is finally over, and we're left with the questions. What is the source of all this supernatural activity, and why does it target Alan? What happened during Alan's missing week? And where is Alice? We have finally reached the end of episode 1 of Alan Wake, and there are 6 episodes in the base game. I am not sure why they decided to break the game into episodes. My guess is that at one point they may have been interested in releasing the game as episodes on the Xbox Marketplace. Also, Valve tried it previously with Half-Life 2, and we all know how that turned out, so Remedy and Microsoft probably thought gamers would be skeptical of this approach and hesitant to buy in. I will not be recounting the remaining 5 episodes in the same detail as I did the first, because every episode follows the same formula. Alan interacts with other characters in daylight and then somehow winds up alone in the woods at night so that he can resume running through extremely similar wooded areas, collecting weapons, ammo, manuscript pages, and coffee thermoses while being ambushed by the same enemies over and over. In some of the later stages, there are gas tanks you can shoot to help blow up enemies, and there are also giant spotlights you can point at enemies and possessed objects. things. Oh yeah, Alan also encounters possessed objects that will rise in the air, shaking and humming, before then flying at Alan and damaging him. Alan also takes damage if he even touches them. There are also bulldozers and other vehicles that become possessed and try to run over Alan, and the dodge mechanic is often too weak to let you escape from them while you're trying to destroy them using nothing but Alan's tiny flashlight. Alan does find better flashlights later in the game, but even these don't work efficiently enough against possessed objects, and Alan winds up taking more damage and dying more than he should. However, in many outdoor situations, all Alan has to do is hide behind a tall pole and the possessed objects can't hurt him at all, in which case the entire scenario becomes cringingly comical, perhaps by accident. This is one more element of the game where the combat just doesn't feel balanced, and yet this is the bulk of the game and seems to be what you're supposed to enjoy the most. The main thing I love about these combat sequences are the sound effects of the woods at night. Even the ambiance is amazing, and the menacing sounds of the Evil Dead, or whatever force it is Alan is supposedly fighting, are scary and fantastic. This game really needs to be played with headphones for the best experience. However, for the rest of this video I will not be going into detail about the exploration because it is just so repetitive, and throughout, Alan experiences absolutely no growth as a character. While the argument can be made that Alan is not a soldier and so he's not good at combat, I like to imagine that most gamers are like me and want to believe that with the right skills and weapons, we can become super badass. Alan goes the other way, and so you as a gamer have to have some extraordinary patience with Alan. In fact, he loses all of his weapons and ammo at the start of each episode, and this is another frustrating design choice. The game gets progressively harder from chapter to chapter, but the player has to find their weapons all over again, always starting with the smallest, weakest flashlight and having to explore to find another pistol, a shotgun or hunting rifle, and flares, flare guns, and flashbang grenades. The first time I found a bigger, better flashlight in the game made me really happy, only to have it taken away at the start of the next episode, and it's just annoying. And for all the running and sprinting that Alan does in episodes 1 through 6, he is still horribly out of shape at the end of the game. Alan can only sprint for a short distance before panting, running out of breath, and slowing down. Even when running down a steep hill, Alan quickly runs out of breath because unlike every human being on Earth, he is incapable of benefiting even from gravity. In a game where the player is expected to cross long distances of terrain, this seems like a major design opportunity Remedy missed. So from here on, I only want to discuss the major plot points since I feel that what Alan Wake does best is present the story and world of the game. Episode 2 starts off with a flashback of a time in New York with Alice, where, like her, Alan admits that he too was afraid of his nightmares as a child and that his mother gave him an old light switch he could use to keep the monsters at bay. He calls it the clicker and gives it to Alice. Right before this, the player can explore Alan's home office to discover manuscript pages from one of Alan's books, but these specific pages are narrated by the voice actor of Max Payne in Remedy's previous series of games, and the situations described sound like they're right out of Max Payne 2.
The femme fatale was gone. Only a sour taste remained of the kiss that killed me.
It's almost as if Remedy is trying to say that Alan's writing inspired or authored the Max Payne universe, which seems like a really cool connection if true, and I hope they explore this possibility more in Alan Wake 2. Back to the present, Alan gets examined by the local doctor and lies about his symptoms so he doesn't get sent to the hospital. Exploring the sheriff's station, Alan meets the front receptionist. The receptionist started telling me about someone named Cynthia Weaver, even though there was no one else there at the time, and so I had no idea that she meant the lamp lady from earlier. Apparently I had just missed her, but I had no idea because I didn't come straight out to the reception area when I left the doctor. Then I finally made an effort to find the sheriff's office. The sheriff asks a lot of reasonable questions and Alan is short on answers because there is no cabin on Cauldron Lake and he can't admit any knowledge of Carl Stuckey's whereabouts without implicating himself for murder. But then he gets a call from an unknown number and hears Alice's voice, followed by her apparent kidnapper. The kidnapper orders him to go out to the back lot and look at the junk heap to find Alice's driver's license as proof of her kidnapping. Returning inside, Alan sees another vision of himself still writing at the cabin, which sets up a nice unreality to everything he's experiencing as it calls into question whether any of this is real or just something Alan is writing. He then meets Dr. Emil Hartman from Alice's book found in the car just after the crash. Hartman invites Alan to stay at his lodge on Cauldron Lake, which makes Alan suspicious immediately, and he socks him one. Certain to be facing arrest now, Alan is liberated by his agent Barry Wheeler, who arrives just in time to to scurry Alan away after comically threatening to sue everyone. Barry serves as a comic relief character for the rest of the game. He and Alan go to the visitor center to rent a cabin in the Elderwood National Park so that Alan can meet the kidnapper later. Leaving Barry in the cabin, Alan sets off for Lover's Peak, but the path takes him back by the visitor center where Deputy Rusty can be heard firing his gun. Alan finds the place a wreck and the deputy wounded inside. He admits seeing one of the Taken possessed by darkness, verifying that Alan is not the only one who can see them. Alan unsuccessfully tries to restore the power, and while returning to Rusty, the air starts to shimmer in a familiar way. There are patches of dark slime on the ground Alan can destroy with his flashlight, and the Taken emerge from the visitor center. Out back, Alan encounters a possessed Rusty who behaves similar to Carl Stuckey from earlier, zipping all over the place until his darkness is removed and Alan has to kill him. Alan then walks through the enemy-laden woods at night. Maybe I missed a secret stash or something, but I never found any flares, and so I was almost unable to get through a group of enemies who surrounded me at this underpass. Only by running past them was I finally able to proceed. Alan meets up with the kidnapper, who we previously saw on the ferry, and for some reason the two of them must work together to get to Lover's Peak, fending off wave after wave of the Taken, with Alan using the flashlight and flares, and the kidnapper using his gun. At the peak, the kidnapper demands Alan's manuscript in exchange for Alice, and Alan responds by somehow knocking them both off a cliff, and the kidnapper runs off, leaving Alan to simply make it through the woods. After spending a half an hour doing that, Alan gets a distress call from Barry and finds a campground where he can steal the keys to someone's truck and then drive back to the cabin. I'm not sure why the Taken start attacking the truck along the way, but Alan can somehow boost the headlights the same way he does the flashlight and then run them over. Otherwise, the truck drives terrible, and it's impossible to keep accelerating without possibly overturning the vehicle, so I just pump the accelerator every once in a while, and it winds up being a short and rough drive back to the visitor center. Up the hill, Alan's path is blocked by a couple of vehicles that I'm unable to ram out of the way, so Alan is back on foot and has to fight his way back to the cabin while taking another angry call from the kidnapper on the way. However, when we get to the cabin, Barry refuses to let us in, instead forcing us to fight multiple simultaneous waves of flying birds using our flashlight and flares, and I guess this is supposed to be some kind of boss fight, but it's really an excuse to try to kill us with cheap shots from behind. Although the sky is still full of birds, Alan just calls it off at some point and Barry finally lets him in. Episode 2 ends with Barry getting a strange call from Rose, the diner waitress, claiming to have found Alan's manuscript. Although it makes absolutely no sense that Rose would have the pages, Alan and Barry go there anyway and receive an extremely slow tour of the trailer park where she lives. Rose answers her door and speaks like an absolute zombie, but for some reason Alan and Barry don't even notice. Rose serves them coffee that is drugged, and Alan sees visions of the light and the widow in his sleep. He wakes up in Rose's creepy bedroom / Alan Wake fan shrine and finds Barry and Rose outside. Rose is catatonic and muttering, and Barry is out of it, so Alan goes to get the car but soon finds himself in a standoff with the sheriff's department and an FBI agent named Nightingale who has serious anger issues. Alan then has to escape from the police, which is no problem since there never seems to be any chance that they'll catch up to him. Alan eventually just switches objectives and decides to run for the radio station in the distance, but a possessed gate stands in his way and he has to start a generator to use a spotlight to destroy it. But wait, the generator conks out, so we literally have to do the same thing again. Then it's more of the same old until we reach the radio station where the sheriff shows up again with Agent Hothead and Alan bails out. It's time for another run through the woods fighting Taken and possessed objects until Alan reaches a train depot where he can steal a truck and drive to the trail leading to an old coal mine. The distance is long, so Alan needs to steal another car and drive to the mine, and there Alan just kinda hangs out until the kidnapper calls him again, and then the building is struck by either an earthquake or a massive force, and it's time for an unfair fight in the rail yard. After another long trek through enemy-infested woods, we get to Muir Peak, where the kidnapper said to meet him. Alan finds him there, only to watch him get pulled off the ground by the tornado that represents the Dark Presence. We never hear what happens to the kidnapper, and we never see or hear of him again throughout the rest of the game. Alan too gets pulled off the deck and thrown into the lake and blacks out just as someone reaches for him, and so ends episode 3 of Alan Wake, which seems to be the most pointless this episode yet. We haven't discovered a single new truth or heard any information that has pushed the plot forward even 1 inch. We then pivot to episode 4, which changes things up a bit, and I'm grateful for it. Turns out the person who pulled Alan Wake out of the lake was none other than Dr. Emil Hartman, who now has Alan trapped in the Cauldron Lake Lodge, which has been converted into a mental health asylum specifically for creative people. Hartman drugs Alan and tries to gaslight him about everything that's happened so far being nothing but Alan's delusional nightmare. We have to follow Hartman on a tour of the entire property, and the most enjoyable part is going outside to virtually touch grass and see the gorgeous landscape of Bright Falls. A storm is coming, so we have to go inside where we find the Anderson brothers, Tor and Odin, playing the Night Springs board game. Hartman mentions they were in a heavy metal band decades ago, which will be important later. The Andersons, who refer to Alan as Tom, invite him to their farm and give him a manuscript page that reveals Hartman used to be an assistant to a writer named Thomas Zane. It's possible that the Andersons have confused Alan with Zane. Under Hartman's orders, Alan must return to his room and start writing, but he cannot, instead experiencing a crippling bout of writer's block. Hearing a commotion outside, he leaves his room. Alan finds that the Anderson brothers have knocked out a nurse, so he steals the keys to the property from her and heads to Hartman's office, only to find this giant-sized photograph of the property and staff mounted on the wall. Alice's supposed kidnapper is featured prominently in the photo. If you're involved with a kidnapping and ransom plot involving a certain individual, I have no idea why you would post their photograph prominently in your place of work. At this point, I'm kind of starting to laugh at the goofiness in this game more than experience these discoveries as revelations. In a nearby room, Alan finds that Hartman has been hoarding the artwork created here by all the patients, and there's a recording of a phone conversation between Hartman and Alice, who contacted the doctor with concerns about Alan's writer's block. Unlocking the other room in this hallway, Alan finds Barry is being held prisoner. Next door is Hartman's office, where Alan confronts him about everything, and Hartman admits that he wanted to work with Alan on his manuscript. The Dark Presence invades the room, and Alan leaves Hartman to apparently be consumed by the Dark Presence, but we actually don't see what happens to Hartman, and he too never appears again in the game. Alan then has to escape the lodge and the grounds, which involves traversing the hedge maze from The Shining, except it's full of Taken. Then we have to take on a minor boss in the form of head orderly Jack and swarming flocks of birds, using only the crappiest flashlight and no flares or flashbangs, and this fight is punishingly painful. I figured out that finally I have to grab a flare gun in the gazebo behind Jack and use it to kill him. But because it's located right below an emergency supply box, I keep opening that instead of picking up the flare gun. Yet on the 5th or 6th try, I finally manage it, but I'm literally just cursing at this game now. After several more ambushes in the dark, Alan reaches the back gate and has to survive a standoff against several enemy waves while Barry gets the gate open, and then they can finally flee. Alan puts it all together for Barry, explaining that there's a power in Bright Falls that can make artists' creations come true, but the Dark Presence twists everything to its own benefit. Despite Barry insisting that he now believes Alan because of all the crazy shit he personally has seen, Alan insists that they have to get to the Andersons' farm to find a piece of paper they wrote everything down on. Just then, the Dark Presence causes an avalanche that triggers a car accident, and Alan and Barry are separated. Each make their way separately to the Anderson farm, with Alan instructing Barry to use flares to take out the Taken he encounters. Barry then heads to the farm to wait for Alan, who naturally has to take the long route full of enemies, possessed objects, and bear traps that glint in Alan's flashlight. Alan soon finds a truck he can steal to drive to the farm. Alan fights his way to the stage on the Anderson farm, and here's where the magic happens. Barry fires up the sound and light system and plays heavy metal music while Alan fights off waves of enemies. And this is undoubtedly one of the funniest and most rewarding battles in the game. When the song ends, the stage pyrotechnics dispel the rest of the enemies, and a small shed explodes for seemingly no reason whatsoever except to allow access to the next area of the farm. While Alan tries to clear the wreckage blocking access to the barn, Barry uses Alan's standee for one of the funniest bits in the game. Now that the game has reverted to self-mockery, I'm starting to wonder if during Alan Wake's 6+ year development cycle, the writers began putting these self-degrading kinds of jokes into the game purely for their own amusement. Inside, Alan can watch an episode of Night Springs on a TV that causes Barry to reveal that Alan used to write episodes of the series. So this is the reason Night Springs features prominently in Alan's opening nightmares nightmare sequence, and also why we see references to it everywhere. Strange that with all of Alan's bits of narration and self-exploration that he never told us before about his involvement with the show. Anyway, upstairs in the barn we find a manuscript page that reveals the moonshine the Anderson brothers were making that made them hallucinate and eventually drove them insane was made from water from Cauldron Lake. Eventually, Alan and Barry break into the Andersons' farmhouse and get the power on and music plays. Downstairs they find a record skipping and lyrics repeat over and over to find the Lady of the Light. Alan believes this to be their next clue. Barry finds the Andersons' moonshine and the two proceed to get blackout drunk. Let's pause to acknowledge that at this late point in the game, the story has taken a serious left turn into comedy and all the suspense has gone out the window. With all the references, or should I say all the derivative characters and plot elements from other properties such as the works of Stephen King, David Lynch, and Evil Dead, I'm starting to see the entirety of Alan Wake as nothing more than a parody. However, it's only late in the game that it starts to seem this way since the game has been presented seriously up to this point. While blacked out on the Andersons' magic moonshine, Alan lives what happened to him during his missing week. This is honestly a pretty cool segment where the player moves a spectator camera through the stage while a ghostly Alan reenacts the events. After Alan dove in to save Alice, he re-emerged from the waters finding nothing. The dark presence manipulated him into going upstairs to his writing room and working on a manuscript that would bring Alice back to life. However, the story Alan wrote would only make the dark presence more powerful. The dark presence had taken the form of Thomas Zane's former lover, Barbara Jagger, so Alan wrote his own escape into the story by writing Thomas Zane into it. Zane was the one who built the cabin on Cauldron Lake, and he came to control the power of light and channel it into his poetry, while Barbara became possessed by the power of darkness, becoming the first of the Taken. While the two confront each other, Alan uses the opportunity to escape from the cabin and drive away. Weakened, Alan crashed, and that's where the game picked up with Stuggy's mission. Alan wakes up from his blackout to find that Nightingale has inexplicably found him again, and episode 4 ends. Episode 5 begins with Alan waking up in a jail cell with Barry, having visions of Cynthia Weaver, aka the Lady of the Light he's supposed to find. He and Barry are soon confronted by Agent Nightingale, who gets carried away with his habit of catcalling Alan using the names of other authors. Just as he's about to execute Alan for no reason, the nearby exit door breaks open and he's pulled out into the darkness. The funny thing is, Nightingale has had so few appearances and has been so angry at Alan in both of them that I thought perhaps he already was being used as a pawn by the Dark Presence. However, since he is apparently killed by the Dark Presence and we never see him again, except for a slight bit part at the ending, I guess that's not the case and I was left wondering why he was even in the story or what purpose he served. It seems that in the end he's merely there to be killed by the Dark Presence so that the sheriff accompanies Alan on his next nighttime mission. While Alan loads up on weapons and ammo in the sheriff's office, she explains that he can find Cynthia Weaver at an old abandoned power plant. Alan and the sheriff then blast their way across town with Alan having to do all the flashlight work. They see Barry running from the Dark Presence, get separated from him, and eventually reunite. With Barry comically wearing Christmas lights for protection, they make their way to a Coast Guard helicopter parked at the local fire department. Predictably, by this point, Alan then has to fight off enemies while the sheriff figures out how to start up and fly the helicopter. Taking off, the sheriff flies them to the old power plant where Cynthia now resides, and the Dark Presence manifesting as a flock of birds causes Alan to fall out of the helicopter. Alan then makes his way to the power plant alone while fighting enemies. After crossing a perpetually spinning bridge, the helicopter reappears and provides support for a while using their spotlight, but then they are driven off by more bird swarms. After more solo fighting, Alan makes it to the power plant and finds Cynthia Weaver. Cynthia has yet another dangerous mission for Alan that requires him to go out in the dark to cut the power to a transformer, since she refuses to do so. At the end of the path, we find this puzzle with 3 switches that raise or lower 3 bridges. I couldn't tell you what the solution is, as I only got all 3 bridges to stay up by pressing buttons at random. Then I crossed the bridges and cut the power. But when I went to cross back, the bridge abruptly opened, although it shouldn't have any power, and I just have to say that I'm really sick of the game throwing sucker punches at me like this. After a completely unnecessary death, I wait and watch the pattern of the bridges, cross back, and return to where Cynthia is while fighting all the familiar enemies all over again. Cynthia explains her relationship to Thomas Zane and Barbara Jagger and how Zane's writing at Cauldron Lake either woke up or created the Dark Presence. Zane then wrote himself and Barbara out of existence, but Cynthia says he still communicates with her. Cynthia lets Alan into a pipeline that leads to the well-lit room at the dam. Alan calls Barry in the helicopter, which crashes. So Alan exits the pipeline and heads for the helicopter wreck. He finds the wreck empty and quickly catches up to Barry and the sheriff, engaged with the Taken. They head for the dam and board the elevator. Alan explains Cynthia's plan to Barry and the sheriff, and then he gets separated from them a few minutes later, forcing Alan to fight his way across the top of the dam. When he reunites with them again, they've found Cynthia Weaver. She takes them to her well-lit room, which is an old army vault. Inside, Alan finds a page that describes something from his childhood, written by Thomas Zane. And he also finds the clicker, which he'd previously given to Alice in New York. Alan says he's ready to finish this, and episode 5 ends. The final episode starts with a flashback to a few years ago in New York, on another day where Alan woke up hungover. I'm not sure why we're flashing back like this, except that at the end, Alan suggests he and Alice go away together on a vacation, so perhaps it's trying to tie the story together somehow? But then we jump back to the present with Alan devising a plan to go back to Cauldron Lake and the cabin, which doesn't exist if you remember, to somehow finish his manuscript and thereby defeat the Dark Presence forever. Alan drives back to Cauldron Lake, making a few optional pit stops along the way to reacquire weapons and ammo. At the end of episode 5, we were fully stocked and even stole the sheriff's pistol, so it makes no sense that we have to collect all the weapons over again, especially this time. Alan drives into a tunnel which is blocked by vehicles, so we have to get out. At the exit, Alan sees a flash of Alice with Barbara, and then it's inexplicably dark outside and enemies appear. We steal another car and continue driving down the road, running over enemies until we reach another barricade in the street. We park at the nearby Majestic Hotel and search the lobby to discover that Agent Nightingale was staying in room number 2. Otherwise, we still don't learn anything about Nightingale or his motivations or his anger from this. Further up the road, the bridge is blocked and we have to cross on foot while fighting possessed objects. We keep having to get out and walk through barricades placed in our way and fighting waves of the same enemies over and over, and then what do you know, there's another long trek on foot through what looks like another mining area. Just how many old abandoned mines does Bright Falls have? Finally getting through the mines, we find ourselves facing the giant vortex that represented the Dark Presence in the beginning. Alan has to dodge flying vehicles hurled at him and make his way over to the center of the Tempest. Jumping a gap, Alan finds another flare gun and limitless ammo. My survival instincts tell me to stay near this ammo box and fire into the tornado, which I did for quite a few minutes. But without something like a final boss gauge displayed on screen, I had no idea that I wasn't even having any effect. Finally, Alan said something about getting into the heart of the tornado, so I carefully tried to jump the gap and failed. But I made it the next time and got right up to the edge, and firing flares from here triggered a reaction in the tornado each time. The Dark Presence tried to throw birds at me, but I kept firing into the middle until I triggered the ending, in which Alan watches the Dark Presence vanish and then uses the clicker to make a wish before jumping in. Instead of returning to the cabin, Alan finds himself in a shadowy version of his New York apartment surrounded by false versions of Alice. The typewritten word clicker hangs in the air over the coffee table, and shining the flashlight causes the word to vanish and the clicker to appear. Alan uses it and sees Thomas Zane in his deep-sea diving suit advising Alan to fill the heart of darkness with light. Alan then finds himself facing his creepy doppelganger, whom Zane refers to as Mr. Scratch, who will be with Alan's friends while he's gone. Alan must use his flashlight to turn more words into objects and pathways, while Alice can be heard telling him she's going to leave him. However, Alan says that what we hear never happened. After manifesting the cabin, Alan goes inside and confronts the Dark Presence, using the clicker to fill it with light and destroy it. Afterward, Alan is still in the cabin. He returns to the writing room and resumes writing the end of his manuscript. We go back to the moment Alan dove into the lake after Alice, and then we see time start to dilate as if moving backwards. Alice swims up to the surface of the lake, but Alan is nowhere to be found. Deerfest occurs like the happy ending the story needs, but in the background we see Rose clutching a lamp as if she knows that behind her in the darkness stands Agent Nightingale in shadows. And then Alan says,
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Much as was indicated by the Stephen King quote at the opening, the ending has indeed been left somewhat open and ambivalent. The Dark Presence has been defeated, but Alan remains trapped in the place it came from. Alan must remain there while Mr. Scratch, the doppelganger written into existence by Thomas Zane, takes Alan's place. 2 special episodes were released after the base game and are included in the PC port. However, they both explore issues Alan faces while trapped in the dark place and do not advance the story. Remedy also released Alan Wake's American Nightmare, in which Alan takes on his evil doppelganger, Mr. Scratch. However, the ending of this game calls into question whether these events only happened in Alan's head. So in Alan Wake 2, I think we can reasonably expect that Alan will still be trapped in the dark place under Cauldron Lake in Bright Falls and seeking to escape and return to his life. While I've been extremely critical of some aspects of this game, overall I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially the game's settings and environments, the atmosphere, and the overall concept of the story. However, throughout this video I did highlight some areas where Alan Wake 2 needs to seek to improve. Number 1, less derivation in characters and story. Although Alan Wake is clearly drawn and inspired from other sources, I was baffled as to why they left in so many callouts to those sources. Remedy should get rid of characters, situations, and locations that so clearly derive from outside fictional works, such as David Lynch's Twin Peaks and Stephen King's story elements. Alan Wake as a game world is perfectly capable of holding its own in terms of world building and storytelling, and doesn't need to prop itself up on the shoulders of others. Number 2, stop the self-mockery. As I called out, there's a point in this game where you feel like the story devolves into self-mockery and self-deprecation, and I do not feel any of that was warranted. A good thriller starts off slow and builds to a heart-pounding climax. This game greatly diffused all that by making fun of itself toward the end and became a distracting parody by introducing slapstick elements that were not present in the first few episodes. Which brings me to my next point. Number 3, drop the episodic structure. As a gamer, it's extremely aggravating whenever any game takes away your guns and ammo, even for a short period. Item and weapon collection is what many gamers enjoy most, and taking their toys away is never a good idea. Allow players to build up arsenals and ammunition, even if we have to store most of it someplace outside the character's inventory. And furthermore, episode endings and recaps of everything we've already experienced takes the player out of the game world and separates them from the amazing reality and atmosphere the game has worked so hard to evoke. Number 4, greater variety in gameplay. Most of this game is about Alan running through the dark woods until the game ambushes him with enemies who attack from all sides. We run into this situation over and over, and it honestly gets boring. Better enemy AI would result in less frustration too, but Remedy recently released a remastered version of Alan Wake available on all platforms that seems to have already addressed some of the control and enemy AI issues that I already addressed. It plays much better, but some greater variety in environments and situations would make for much better gameplay. So my point is that Alan Wake is a horror game that doesn't seem to really believe in itself, and even drops most of the horror premise halfway through. But it was an enjoying setup to what could certainly be an amazing game experience, and hopefully we'll get that in Alan Wake 2. I hope you've enjoyed this recount of my playthrough of Alan Wake, and if you'd like to watch more videos like this, I hope you'll click the like button on this one and subscribe for more content like this on Double Back for Ammo. Thanks for watching and have a great day.